Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Quite a few people actually said they'd like to see the final version of the talk, so I'll record a soundtrack to it and get it posted later today. It does actually take quite a long time to render that video because it's 45 minutes long and then quite a long time to load it on YouTube, so it will be quite late today before it gets up there. Yeah, I'm quite happy to do it. And again, I mean, although people spotted spelling errors and word errors and things like that last time round, and most of the changes involve taking text out rather than putting new text in, but there still could be the odd one lurking. So if you spot any words that are wrong or spelt wrong or the context is wrong, leave it in the comment and I'll just about have time to tweak it before I have to do this on Friday evening. I must admit, I won't say I'm dreading it, but there is an air of nervousness this time because of the people I'm actually talking in front of. It's the fact that I know a lot of them quite well, and they're experienced and all that sort of stuff. But you can only do what you can do. So, and this is aimed at you know, sort of people up the beginner's end, growing orchids in the home and that sort of thing. So I hope they'll be patient with me. So here goes. Thank you for that introduction. Now all I've got to do is live up to it. Please remember this is a video presentation, so please keep your answers until the end because I can't stop and start like perhaps you would in a slideshow. So questions at the end please, and let's get going. Okay, so every orchid grower has to start somewhere, and this is a bit about my story. I had one orchid when I was at college. And my story progressed to where I am now, and most of my family think that is totally certifiable. They all think I'm nuts. Nonetheless, that's the progress. I'll be looking into a bit of history about me and how I got where I am, very short. A bit of science and chemistry, very simplistic, very basic details. Have a look at some orchid types and some care for those orchids. So where did it all start then? Well, for me, it started a very long time ago when men walked in front of cars with a red flag. Seriously, a long time ago. Seriously, most of us probably started right there with a white Phalaenopsis, possibly as a gift or spur of the moment purchase. Maybe not, but a lot, you know, probably started there. But then often this happens. Brown bread. First orchid often doesn't make it, and this can put people off, but it shouldn't do. There are some very simple things you can do to keep your orchid alive. Trouble is, you usually find them out afterwards. But unfortunately, if you do keep one alive, it begins, and you often find that your little one orchid, some orchid fairies turn up in the night and start dropping them off, and you start ending up with a little bit of a collection starting here. And then before you know it, all your windowsills look like that. Yeah, and your partner thinks you're nuts, your pets disown you, and you know, it just starts getting serious. I hope that story seems familiar to some of you. I know that's the way I went. But the time has passed when you can seek help if all your windowsills are full. Crazy people don't know they're crazy. I know I'm crazy, therefore I'm not crazy. And then you get a grow room. So that's really my progress, you know, from a single orchid to some orchids to too many orchids to cope with on the windowsill to a dedicated grow space that I now have with about 230 orchids in there, very squashed in as well. Okay, a bit of a history and a little joke or two. Now let's have a think about some science and chemistry. I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. If you asked all the growers in this room how they feed their orchids, they will all give you a different answer, and they probably all think they're right. Yeah? But at the end of the day, orchids are just plants. They might be a little bit special, but they're still just plants, and like all plants, they need food and water. Exclude either of those two and they're not going to do very well. Yeah, so we have to think about feeding and watering our plants. How good is the water you use? These two bits of kit I have found absolutely essential. There's a TDS meter. TDS stands for total dissolved solids, or as I think of it, total dissolved stuff, because you don't know what it is. And a pH meter that will tell you how acidic or alkaline your water is. I use those two things every time I feed my orchids, without fail. I like to know what my orchids are getting. So a couple of quid on eBay, really. Right, water types then. You've got tap water, and certainly around here that's not that good. That's not good at all for orchids. Rainwater, very good for orchids. Reverse osmosis water, probably even better. You can use dirty, filthy, polluted water if you like, and if you're not careful your rainwater can end up like that. Right, some basic feed stuff then. We've all heard of NPK, that's your nitrogen. But there are three different types you'll come across, your phosphorus and your potassium. All plants need these, and these are classed as macro elements. These are the high numbers on your fertiliser. You know, your sort of 20-20-20 stuff, that sort of thing. Three types of nitrogen, urea, ammonium and nitrate. Urea needs some work done on it before it's any good for your plants. And ammonium does too. Nitrate type nitrogen just works. So if you can get a fertiliser with that type of nitrogen, or predominantly that type, do it. Your secondary elements, calcium, magnesium and sulphur. Quite honestly, I can't emphasise the importance of calcium. And don't rely on the calcium in your tap water. It's the wrong type. You need calcium nitrate, not carbonate, and the other two need to be there in a reasonable quantity. And then right at the tail end are all these little micro elements, and some of these are in really tiny amounts, like, you know, 0.01 or less of a percent of your feed, but nonetheless they need to be there. Fertilizers without these, your plants will eventually deteriorate. So the easy answer is to get a well-balanced fertiliser that's got all of those things in it, and use rainwater or RO water, and you'll be on a sound footing. How strong you want to feed is a whole different subject. I could speak for an hour on it. Okay, so that is important. You need to get those elements into your plants, and you need some good quality water as a vehicle to, you know, to get those nutrients into your plants. As I say, how strong you feed is a whole nother subject. Right, let's have a look at some orchids. Most of the orchids I'm going to talk about are what I call readily available. You can get them in stores, supermarkets, garden centres, or at our shows, obviously, when the vendors are there, the traders. They'll have a bigger variety, obviously. And I'm going to start with the humble Phalaenopsis, also known as the orchid weed, the Phalaenopsis, yeah, or the peasant orchid. And quite honestly, this is absolutely outrageous. These are perfectly good orchids. We don't want any orchid snobs around here. This is good stuff. And some people even specialise in growing Phalaenopsis. These are some I've either had or have still got, just to get a feel of what the blooms can look like, because they can vary quite a bit, from quite small, delicate little mini there. That's quite a large hybrid, very plain on first glance, but look at that edging, looks like it's backlit. Medium-sized ones, you tend to get more blooms per weight of plant. Again, you can get plain coloured ones. Up into the larger size here, this is a large orchid, this is about 4 inches across. Delicate colours, almost looks like it's made of paper. And then you can get the real minis, and some of these are very delicately patterned. I've got a feeling, although this is a no ID hybrid, that's quite close to a species, that one. This is a bright and cheerful colour here, nice daffodil yellow, but it's still got delicate patterning on it. You know, some of the patterning can be spotted, some can be blotched. This is one of the few that I've got with a name. It's called Sweet Memory. It's a primary cross, so two species crossed together, that one. Don't ask me which, I've forgotten. It's another little mini, and again, I just love that delicate edging on that colour. It just looks like it's backlit, having done quite a bit of photography. And my all-time favourite that I've ever had is this one. Blooms 4.5 inches across, and the most stunning colour. Absolutely gorgeous. So I never look down on the humble Phalaenopsis. I always put them on a high shelf so that I can look up at them. Ha ha. But seriously, these are worthwhile, and if you're going to only grow in the home, you're going to have some of these because these are some of the easiest to grow. Let me elaborate. Thinking about temperature, well, I always say if you're comfortable, so are your Phalaenopsis. If you've got your hat and gloves and scarf on, then it's too cold for your Phalaenopsis. Light levels, reasonable. Humidity, reasonable. Notice there's not really any specifics. I'll say it again. If you're comfortable in an environment, the chances are your Phalaenopsis will be. You know, do you want to sit in a window in brilliant sunshine? No, well, nor do these. Yeah, so a nice, reasonable, cosy environment. And quite honestly, in amongst the orchids, this is probably the most easygoing orchid you can choose to grow. It will put up with a lot of nonsense. It'll put up with you getting it quite a long way off its comfort zone. As far as repotting these is concerned, there's no real precise timing on this. I would suggest when they're in vegetative growth rather than when they're putting up a spike. That's not the best of ideas. Your buds will probably blast. So when it's growing new leaves and roots is a good time. Don't worry about the time of year. That's not important. It really isn't important for these orchids. These can grow at any time of year. They don't really have a season for growing. They might have a blooming season though. As far as feeding these are concerned, these like a nice even feed. So no chopping and changing, no high levels and then forgetting them for a month and then chucking in another. Just keep it even, a nice even feed with most waterings, allowing for a flush every now and again to stop any build up in your pot, all that sort of stuff. So nice even feed. They will take quite high feed, yeah? Right, story time. Okay, these mass-produced orchids in the hundreds and hundreds of thousands all start at the same place with some seed, you know, a hybrid, a cross between two plants, produce the seed, they then go into the laboratory. Basically, mass production is based on either starting from seeds in flasks or the merichrome process, which means mushing up the growing tips and producing a mush and spread on the growing media, but in flasks anyway, and then they're gradually moved on through the flasks until they produce visible plants that you can actually see. Eventually they come out of the flasks and they get potted up, and then they are grown on in absolute precise exacting conditions that we just cannot recreate. Exact lighting, exact day lengths, exact temperatures, and these are grown warm, the Phalaenopsis, 27, 28 degrees, with a drop at night. Day length spot on. They use all sorts of growth hormones and stuff in the feed and watering program. Fully automated, no people around, just making sure the machines work properly. More like Terminator, isn't it? But yeah, it is a massive scale operation. And eventually you get some orchids packed up, put on trolleys and wheeled out into a lorry. And these mass producers, mainly the Netherlands and Germany, they're doing all that work and all that effort, and at their point of sale, their wholesale price is around €3 or €4. Yeah, so any other production method would put the prices up dramatically. That's why we can go into Homebase and pay £8 for a Phalaenopsis in bloom, including a decorative pot. Yeah, it's the only way those prices that can be kept at those sort of levels is the mass scale operation that they do. So it's all good stuff. We need that. Okay, on to some Oncidiums, which includes the intergenerics. There's lots of, it's like an alliance, and a lot of interbreeding goes on. Generic term, intergenerics. But these are rewarding, and most will grow reasonably well in your home. Now, I've included these, whereas most people probably wouldn't. They're not always easy to get hold of, but I have seen these for sale in Stewart's on the outskirts of Christchurch, and they certainly turn up at shows now and again. There was loads of them at the RHS show a few years ago, all in bloom and all about £5. So, but the beauty of these is their size, and I'll go into that in a minute. There's a few basic rules needed to grow these well. This is my one of my favourites in my collection at the moment. Note, it is an Oncidium similarity in the shape. There is a similarity there. You can see it. That is a basic Oncidium type shape. Long arching spikes, quite a few blooms, and the spikes can branch. So quite rewarding. But this is what I'm getting at with the plants. I'll get my hand in there in a minute so you get a principle of scale. But these are now called Tolumnias. They were once called equitant Oncidiums. And if you look at these leaves, they are fleshy, succulent-like, real thick, chunky leaves. They're capable of storing a fair bit of water. Long spike, multiple buds on the end, and sometimes will branch after the initial blooming. So don't be in a hurry to cut your spikes off. But these are twig epiphytes. Yeah, they grow on little twigs. So if anybody ever asks me what do you pot your Tolumnias in, I always say you don't pot them in anything. You pot them on something. They will grow on almost anything. They grow on a couple of bits of lava rock in a clay pot. They'll grow on the clay pot. They'll grow on little open mesh baskets with or without a couple of chunks of bark. But if you put those roots in anything and keep them wet, they will rot. They need the fastest wet-dry cycle you can imagine, which sounds like it's not that good in the home, but think about it, it could be, because they're going to dry quickly in your home. But you'd need to water them every day. I've got all mine mounted, that just solves the problem. Right, another one that will turn up in the stores quite frequently are Brassica-related types of Oncidiums. I just sort of think of these as spidery. You know, they are called the spider orchids, but there's a lot of intergenerics with Brassica in there. The Brassica trait is very long, thin petals and sepals with a relatively small lip for the size of the bloom. So as soon as you see these long, spindly petals and sepals, there's probably a little bit of Brassica in there somewhere. Not always, but probably. That's a gorgeous colour, that one. It might not look much, but you have to see it. That is an actual Brassada, which is two closely related genera, Brassica and Ada crossed. That turns up quite often, that one. Nice yellow. This is a true Brassica. Those blooms are 8 inches from top to bottom and highly fragrant. You've got one of those in your house, you will know it's there because of its fragrance. This is another popular one, Shelob Tolkien. Somebody had a bit of a Lord of the Rings fetish going on here. But that turns up quite frequently. It's quite a popular one. Lovely patterning and lovely fragrance again. Right, the thing you need to bear in mind with the Brassica types, and those that have got a lot of Brassica in them, they can get pretty big. There's a 30-centimetre ruler there, which is a foot in old money, and you can see that doesn't even come up to the top of the plant. Very big, very robust and vigorous growing in the main. They've all got these egg-shaped pseudobulbs, a couple of leaves sticking out the top, sometimes a few near the base. The new growths push out and they don't form those bulbs until they progress. Yeah. So at first they just look like a long thin growth, and then gradually the pseudobulbs develop. But as you can see, these can grow quite large. A nice plant, that one. Right, obviously in the Oncidium Alliance some of them are actual Oncidiums. Although if you go and make a coffee, when you come back, that somebody will have probably changed the name to something else, and then the next day it will be something else again. They're always changing the names here. Now this one I got not because it's got my name in it. Oncidium varicosum rogersii baldwin. There's a mouthful. And it's not called that now, it's called something totally different. If you can get hold of this, have it. It smells of chocolate. Really strong vanilla chocolate. It will fill your room with fragrance. Absolutely stunning if you can get hold of it. The twinkles come round. Now these are tiny little Oncidiums. Nice compact plants. Easy to grow, masses of blooms, and very, very fragrant. That's the beauty of these. There's another little twinkle. I love it when the colour is actually part of the name. Oncidium twinkle yellow. It's because it's yellow, you see. Again, fragrant, masses of little blooms. Again, this one comes round and does the rounds, Catatanti. Gorgeous autumn colours and a massive spike, self-supporting spike, really good. Miltonias are part of the alliance, and the intergenerics with Miltonia in will often be fragrant. This one comes round now and again, Peter Comp. I've got some that, I mean, when I bought this, it was labelled Orchid, not a clue. It's an Oncidium type of some sort, but lovely deep yellow colour on that one, and masses of blooms, really good spike. This was labelled Hamiltonara. I'd never heard of it before, and it probably isn't called that anymore, but that's what it was called when I got it. Lovely yellow again. You can tell I like the yellows, can't you? And my all-time yellow was just labelled Cambria, which technically speaking can't be used anymore because the component parts have changed, or at least one of them has, but lovely plant, that one. So that assortment of blooms should sell the Oncidium Alliance. If that doesn't, then nothing will. So a large variety of colours, patterns and shapes within the blooms. Yeah? But what about the plants themselves? This is an assortment, just to get a feel. Buried in amongst the plant with the purpley blooms on the top is that 30cm ruler again, just to give you an impression. Now the one on the right at the back looks as though it's potted wrong, yeah? But I have this thing about allowing room for a plant to grow. All of those growths that you're looking at there are new growths. They haven't matured yet. Well, they need somewhere to grow. And where are the next lot of new growths going to come out? Directly in front of those. So that was pushed to the back of the pot deliberately. This one I bought in Homebase, and it was labelled houseplant, not even orchid. I do mount some of my Oncidium types. I've got a lot of mounted orchids because in my environment they do well because I can keep the humidity high. So I do mount a few. There's a nice little twinkle. Now you can see the difference in the plant size. This is quite a compact little plant. Highly fragrant, that one. Really does fill the room. And you often get 2 spikes per pseudo bulb, one out each side, which is pretty good going. This one's called Tiny Twinkle, so it's a miniature. And again, it's mounted. It likes being on that mount. It pushes up good new growths. Hasn't been on that mount, I think, about 1.5 years. So it's done that from a few bulbs in 1.5 years. Again, highly fragrant, very attractive, but small. If you're going to get a small plant, you must expect that in the main, the blooms are going to be a bit smaller. But this is your typical Oncidium Alliance shape. Those egg-shaped pseudo-bulbs, couple of leaves coming out from the base, couple sticking out the top, yeah, and roots come out from the base, if you're lucky. But that's a typical looking plant. And some can grow larger than that. I would say that was average or a reasonable size for a lot of the Oncidium Alliance. But a rewarding alliance. They're pretty easy, and most will grow okay in the home. Right, now as far as looking after these are concerned, their temperature range again is pretty tolerant. They don't like to get too cold. Don't chuck them outside in the snow, and they'll take heat. So if your house heats up like it did last year in the heat wave, these will be okay. These need good light, so much better light than your Phalaenopsis. These do need a stronger light. Get them up near a window, but don't get them in direct sun, in anything but weak winter sun, or they could burn. And don't let them touch the glass. Yeah, glass can be really hot. And these like a bit of extra humidity, which in the home's not so easy. But if you can raise your humidity a bit and stick to those things, these will do okay. They are quite tolerant. They do have some unusual growth patterns. A lot of Oncidiums don't have an annual growth. They mature their bulbs in 9 to 10 months. So they can be in bloom almost any time of year. Yeah? And that fact is quite important when it comes to repotting these. It is important because if you get this right, your plants will grow like weeds. They'll take off like little rockets. Get it wrong and they won't. They'll stall. Right. So as far as repotting these is concerned, you repot these when you see new roots coming out of your growths, yeah? that's your time to repot. Doesn't matter what the book says, oh, repot in the spring. Repot these when they tell you to. And if you repot when those new roots are coming out, they'll get a hold and they'll take off. A media that can hold a bit of moisture, something like small bark and sphagnum moss, and try and keep them in a small pot. I've found that the roots grow much better in a confined space. I don't know why, don't ask. Right, when these are actively growing, they will drink. You can keep them quite moist all the time. But you need to watch your watering, because there will be periods when your plant might not actually be doing anything at all. Well, if it's not growing, what's it going to do with that water and all that food you're giving it? Not a lot, yeah? So adjust your watering to what your plant's doing. These like a bit of airflow if you can do it, and a bit of humidity. But apart from that, quite tolerant and pretty good around the home. Right, Dendrobiums. A lot of these are just not suited for growing in the home, but a couple are. And the couple that are come round for sale quite frequently. There's a bonus for you. That's probably why they come round for sale quite frequently. Right, we'll have a look at the nobile types. This is just, there is only one nobile, the species. Like Highlander, there can be only one, but there is a lot of hybrids, an awful lot. But they have a distinctive look to them. Basically, they come in many colours, and most of the blooms are quite large. Yeah, this is one that turns up quite a lot, Spring Dreamer pollen. This is a nice yellow one. Not so many deep yellow ones like this around, but this one turns up now and again, Prima Donna. This one, if you see it, Stardust Firebird, I wouldn't recommend it. It's a bit of a kiki machine, this one. But if you can get one to bloom like that, it is quite a spectacle. And this is another type I've got, and this is a totally non-typical nobile, because this blooms in the middle of summer, whereas most bloom in late winter, early spring. Right, these are sold dwarfed down using growth restrictors and bloom boosters to get them to be a mass of blooms when you buy them. Take a good look, because recreating that is not as easy as it might seem. So they're sold in that manner, dwarfed down, easy packing for us to buy. Understanding this cycle will help you grow these. Let's start after blooming in the spring, when the new growths start. I say with all orchids, when they're growing, feed and water well. These don't need a lot of light during the growing season. You just need to get a lot of food and water in there to push those canes on. We've got a short growing season, so they need pushing hard. Get them as big and bold as you can. As we head into autumn, November time, reduce the feed down, because the canes should have reached maturity. And as you go into December, the water needs reducing down as well. Not stopped. Take no notice of books that say don't water your nobiles in the winter or they won't bloom. It's cobblers. These are hybrids, not the species. They will need some water or the canes will desiccate, but not a lot. And the brightest possible light you can give them. These can sit on a windowsill in full sun in the winter time, do them no harm at all, and it will help induce those buds. The buds will start sort of January, February time and push on. And when you see those buds, well, buds won't grow without a bit of food and water, will they? So you can start reintroducing your food and water. And then sometime down the line, and it varies from hybrid to hybrid, some of them start producing their new growths at the same time as the buds are growing. Some of them don't produce a sign of a new growth until blooming's actually over. But watch out, as the buds start to swell away from those canes, give them some help. Start reintroducing a more frequent watering and start bringing in some low-level feed, and then gradually build it up. And the same again, once you see those new growths starting to push out, get at it. They've got a short growing season. Yeah, so we're back to the feed and water well. If you don't get that annual cycle spot on, they're probably still going to bloom anyway. Mine did. I never did any of this nonsense, and mine still bloomed in the home. They still do now, and I've had some of them a long time. But get somewhere near that and you'll help yourself get more blooms. This is a look. I haven't got a lot of nobile types. I've got a lot of dendrobiums, but not a lot of nobiles. This is Spring Dreamer pollen, and this one's being silly. This was a couple of kikis I took off a mother plant that's long since gone, which I'm supposed to be growing on, and the kikis have decided to bloom. And the kikis, as you can see, are also growing a kiki. Kiki just means baby plant, if you haven't come across that expression before. And this was a little division. Now, strictly speaking, I ought to take those blooms off and give the plant a chance, but it's pretty blooms, isn't it? So I've let them bloom, but that is going to reduce the strength of those plants, you know, because they haven't started their new growths yet. But anyway, I will be growing those on. Again, the old 30 centimetre ruler is in the background, because this one's a little bit of a monster. This is Prima Donna, the bright yellow one that you saw back in the pictures. Now, this got a best hybrid in show at Wessex last year. That was before I split it and repotted it. So this is a classic example of what happens to a nobile if you disturb it at the wrong time. Yeah. So the new canes that it grew last year, because it was repotted later in the season, because it was in full bloom and I wanted to take it to the show, it got repotted late, and as a consequence its new root system was late being produced and its new canes didn't grow to their full height. This year's will, but last year's didn't. Yeah. But it's a typical nobile type. They bloom from the nodes opposite each leaf. The leaves are alternate and the nodes are on the opposite side of each leaf will bloom. Once they've bloomed, they don't bloom again. But what they will do is fill in any gaps that they didn't do the year before, which is what this one's doing. So there's no buds on last year's growths. They may bloom later in the year because it's a little bit out of step because of the repot time. My fault, but nonetheless. But if you look at the older canes, you can get little gaps. You can see the little stubby bits on those canes. That's where it bloomed the year before. But then it's filling in the gaps now. It missed a couple of nodes at the top of that cane. Yeah, so they're now producing buds. So don't be in a hurry to take canes off. They might not look elegant once they start dropping their leaves, which they will do after a couple of years. But that's a typical nobile in various stages. It's coming into bloom, it's got some new canes that didn't develop, and next year that one's going to look good again. But not so much this year. Now, these are not so difficult, not so easy to get hold of, but if you can get hold of them, quite honestly, these are an awful lot easier to grow than the nobile types. And they do have some unusual, almost freaky blooms in amongst these, almost alien-like. But these are pretty easy to grow. You can see we've changed shape as far as the blooms are concerned now. We do start having a more unusual shape. Very delicate, some of these. This is a primary cross, and quite honestly with that one, the best colours are on the back of the blooms. They're best looked at from above. And this is a little species one. Once you find somewhere that sells these, there's hybrids and species are equally as easy to get hold of. Right, these are easy, trust me, even the species. And the main reason is the Laurio group come from around Papua New Guinea and the area like that. So they tend to have a wet season and a dry season. They don't get cold, but they do get pretty warm. And these need to stay pretty warm most of the time. So we're back up to normal house temperatures again now, aren't we? And these are comfortable, yeah? When they're actively growing, they need feeding and watering well. I think I've said that once already. I might say it again, yeah? But they will have periods when there are no new growths actively growing and all the canes on there have finished growing. At that point, you need to ease right off because they can be a little bit prone to rotting at the base. But it's only because you're giving them water in what would be their drier season when they finish growing. But these do like a little bit of humidity. That would be something you'd have to probably take on board, you know, get some humidity trays or something like that. These like reasonable light to good light, but not strong light. They will bloom any time of year. They don't really have a season for blooming. They'll push out spikes from the tops of the canes anytime you like, quite honestly. But their main growing season would be what would be our summer, when we get our longest days, you know, and all that sort of stuff. But if you can get them, they're easier than the nobiles and much easier to get to bloom. These are some of the plants I've got. Mine got hit by the heat wave, and I did lose some leaves. I had trouble coping last year in that heat wave. These are actually the latest new growths, and they just dumped their leaves. They couldn't cope. But it will recover. It's a strong plant. It grows 5 or 6 new canes every year, so it will recover. And all of its canes are blooming. It blooms on every single new growth from the top. And the bonus with these, guess how long the blooms last? 3 months. Seriously, 3 months. And that's the real bonus. No other Dendrobiums last as long as this. People say this looks like a bird in flight. Dendrobium rhodostictum, this one. Out of the Laurias, this is probably one of my favourites because of the shape. And you can see this one's actually blooming on a leafless cane, as well as a cane with leaves on. So unusual shaped canes though, long spindly things with a bulgy bit on the top and then the leaves poking out the top. So you've got an unusual looking plant as well. And you see what I mean about a bit alien like? There are some unusual shaped Laurias, and some incredible patterning on there. The actual colours on that lip are stunning. That plant grows quite tall. It's a larger one. You can see the progression. The canes are getting taller and taller. It's still probably not up to its full height yet, so that one is going to be a tall one. But they tend to be taller rather than wide. They've got that in common with the nobiles. But these are rewarding, quite honestly, because of the length of time the blooms last. You know, I'd say a minimum of 2.5 months if they're in a reasonable environment. The blooms will last and last. Some of them are fragrant, but not many, quite honestly. Most they've got a very slight floral fragrance if you get your nose right in there. Right, and these turn up all the time. The Phalaenopsis type Dendrobiums, not to be confused with the actual Phalaenopsis plants. They've been given that sort of nickname because of one of the types of plant that goes into the actual hybrids, but they do have a Phalaenopsis look about the blooms, so they're often just referred to as the Phalaenopsis types. Again, many colours, and some of these colours are heading towards black. They're such deep purples and deep burgundies, and right through to the purest whites. This one's actually got a name, Thai Angel, and I like this one a lot because of the delicate patterning on that one. With the light behind it, that looks gorgeous. Right, these types are pretty easy to grow as well. Again, they don't like to get cold, so they're going to be happy in your home temperatures. They like reasonable to good light, same sort of light as the Laurias. Some say that increasing the light a little bit and dropping the temperature a little bit induces them to bloom. I've found that they bloom anyway, quite honestly. They may not bloom as well though without those little tips. Again, with these, they won't be growing year round. They will grow up their new growths mainly through our growing season. Push them hard, feed and water well, get those canes as large and plump as possible. And then they will often have a bit of a rest. They will just stop growing for a bit. Ease right off on the watering and feeding if they're not actively growing. That really applies to all orchids, quite honestly. But for these, you know, the roots are prone to rotting if kept soggy when they're not being used because the water's not being absorbed and the plant's not growing. It does make sense, doesn't it? I hope. Apart from that, they're pretty easy going. Don't get them in bright sunshine. A bit of winter sun might hurt them, or a bit of very early sun, but they don't need the brightest of lights, but they do need more light than the Phalaenopsis would generally need. So like Oncidiums, reasonable light and pretty even growing year round, but they will have periods when they're not actively growing. Now, I've only got a couple of these types. for some reason, in amongst all my other dendrobiums, these don't do so well for me. Well, you can't grow everything well, can you? And it might be, I suspect, that my grow room's just too cold for these in the winter, and they don't like it. It puts an element of stall on them because they don't like getting too cold. But they have a typical shape. Most of these bloom directly out the top of the cane. Canes are normally bare up till, almost up to the top of the cane where the leaves are. They will eventually drop their leaves, but they shouldn't be doing that frequently. But be aware, some of these can grow quite tall. That's nowhere near the tallest one I've ever seen. Like I said, spikes traditionally, the first spike on a new growth will come straight out the top. That one pushed out 2, so not just 1 necessarily, and they can spike again from below the first and second leaf. So just because your cane has had its spike push out the top doesn't mean to say it won't spike again. And if these are grown really, really well, you will get massive spikes on these. My spikes are not typical, in fact they're not very good. So you can do a lot better than that. But as I said, mine don't like the cold in the winter. But that's their method of growing. New growths start at the bottom, push up, and quite honestly should at least be as big as what was there before. And if they're as big or bigger, they should be doing okay. A lot of the shops cut the canes off just halfway, and it looks horrible. If you're going to cut a cane off because you don't like the look of it, which is not the best of reasons, cut it off at the base and put a bit of cinnamon on the thing. It'll seal it. That will spark off some thoughts. Right, the Cattleya Alliance. Some of these are miniatures, some of these are absolute monsters, and the most important thing to think of with these is they like a wet-dry cycle. So thoroughly water them and then let them get bone dry, and then do it again. Yeah, many different colours in amongst these and sizes. I don't profess to have a huge amount. I think I've got a dozen or so. That one was absolutely stunning, and I'm sure that's a sort of species. I lost that one a while ago, but an absolutely stunning red. I've still got this one. This is what I call a typical blousy Cattleya, magenta colour, nice gold in the lip. This is a real miniature plant. The plant's only 6 inches tall, and relative the bloom's quite large. This one's quite popular. It's called Ivanagara apple blossom, but it isn't anymore. I grow mine in clay pots with holes in, just in bark, and let the roots crawl all over them. Again, this plant's heading up towards 30 centimetres. They do vary. And this little miniature took a first and got an award of excellence at our Christmas do. Right, these can be easy, but you need to have a think. In the main, these like a lot of air around their roots. Yeah, they like that light, airy feel around their roots. Most have big, thick, fleshy roots and love to get hold of things. Sinking these in a soggy pot is not the best of ideas. I grow some of mine mounted, not ideal in the home because of the humidity problem, but I just grow mine in the large Orchiata bark, nothing else, and I use those holy clay pots to get the air in round there. And with the Orchiata bark supposedly lasting 3 or 4 years, they can sit in them pots for ages without being disturbed until they climb out the sides, and over the side and down the side. These will grow quite well if looked after. They like to be fed and watered when in active growth. I think I might have said that before. I'll say it again. Yeah, but there will be times again when they're not growing at all, not producing any buds, they're just sitting there staring at you. Well, don't keep them wet during that time, they won't like it. Just cut that watering and feed right down until you start seeing some growths again. You need to repot these when the new roots are coming out. Some of these are just prone to dumping their old root system, but if you stick to that rule, it'll work. Just repot when the new roots are growing, and never mind what time of year it is. Chuck those books away. Fed up with reading about it. Right, problems with buying orchids then. When you get them home, try and gently lift them out the pot. Put your hand over the bottom, turn the plant upside down and lift the pot off. Have a sniff and a feel around that media. And quite honestly, if it smells of mushrooms, repot it. Yeah, there's more orchids lost by leaving them in horrible media and losing the root system than probably any other reason. Right, some environmentals. Try and keep your humidity up. Get some humidity trays or something along those lines, and try and maintain around 60% across your temperatures, because it will vary. A couple of gadgets might help you. You can get home humidifiers, room humidifiers. Just remember they push out a cool mist, so don't get your plants in the direct blast because you'll chill them, but those can raise your humidity nicely. They can work quite well. I've got several of these around, or had several of these. They're about 35 quid on eBay. They'll hold 5 litres, which in the home would probably last a couple of days before you need to fill them up again. And they work well. They're easy to manage, nice little things. As far as these are concerned, they're about 6 quid, 7 quid. You get the humidity measured, you get a clock, and you get a minimum and maximum temperature, and you can even vary it between centigrade and Fahrenheit, for those of you who are old-fashioned and still use Fahrenheit. Message for everybody: enjoy your orchids. If your orchids are a chore, perhaps you need another hobby. Expect some failures. Not every plant will grow well, and sometimes you don't even know why it fails. And learn, learn, learn. Be a sponge. Soak in that information from wherever you can get it, and get to see as many orchids as you can. Get round the shows, get to some nurseries, see as many as you can, get a feel for what they're supposed to look like. And I always ask this question: are your orchids doing okay? And if the answer's yes, then great. But stop and think, could they be doing any better? And if the answer to that's yes, then try and find out how. Yeah. And apart from that, thanks for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. And maybe I'll see you at the next talk that I'm putting together, if I'm invited to give it, of course. Okay, any questions then? Thank you very much.